Right then, pull up a chair, grab a pint or a cup of tea if you're feeling proper, and let me spin you a yarn about a right old mess. A proper Jacobean whodunit that shook the very foundations of King James I's court. We're talking about the Overbury scandal, a tale so twisted, so full of sex, power, betrayal and dodgy potions, it makes your average soap opera look like a primary school play. Now imagine this, it's the early 17th century, England, right? King James I is on the throne, a man who, bless his cotton socks, had a bit of a thing for handsome young men. And his current favourite, the apple of his eye, was a dashing, if perhaps not entirely bright, Scot named Robert Carr. This lad Carr, he was the king's golden boy, showered with titles, lands and influence. He went from being a rather obscure page to Viscount Rochester, and then later the Earl of Somerset. A meteoric rise, you might say, built almost entirely on charm and, well, the king's affections. But every rising star needs a wingman, right? A fixer, a brain behind the brawn. And for Robert Carr, that was Sir Thomas Overbury. Overbury was no slouch himself, sharp as a tack, a poet, an essayist, and the kind of mate who'd tell you when you were about to make a monumental cock-up. He was Carr's confidant, his advisor, the one whispering in his ear, guiding him through the treacherous waters of court politics. Think of them as a Jacobean power duo. Carr, the charismatic frontman, and Overbury, the cynical strategist pulling the strings. Now things were ticking along swimmingly until a certain lady sashayed into the picture. Enter Lady Frances Howard, Countess of Essex. And oh, what a character she was. A famous beauty, sure, but with a reputation that preceded her, let's just say. She was married, unhappily it must be said, to Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex. But Frances had set her sights on a new prize, Robert Carr. And when Frances Howard wanted something, she tended to get it. This, my friends, is where our story truly unravels into a glorious, chaotic mess. So, Frances Howard decides she must have Robert Carr. Simple as that. The problem? She's already married. And divorces in the 17th century weren't exactly a quick trip to the registry office. This called for an annulment, and a rather scandalous one at that, based on the grounds that her husband, the Earl of Essex, was, well, incapable of performing his marital duties. Now, imagine the gossip flying around court. The whole thing was a right spectacle, a grand pantomime of private parts and public humiliation. Essex's friends were practically dragged in to testify that, no, their mate was not impotent. He just clearly wasn't interested in her. Ouch. Now, Overbury, being the loyal and rather prudish friend he was, saw this whole affair as a disaster waiting to happen for Carr. He knew Frances Howard was trouble with a capital T, a schemer from a powerful and notoriously ruthless family, the Howards, led by her granduncle, the Earl of Northampton, who had ambitions as vast as the king's hunting grounds. Overbury was vehemently against the marriage, arguing it would ruin Carr's standing and pull him into a viper's nest of political intrigue. He even wrote a poem, A Wife, which, while ostensibly about the ideal wife, was widely interpreted as a not-so-subtle dig at Frances Howard, highlighting all the qualities she lacked. Not exactly a great way to win friends and influence people, eh? Overbury tried everything to dissuade Carr, even going so far as to use pretty harsh language about Frances. He feared losing his influence over Carr to the Howards, and rightly so. Frances, meanwhile, was incandescent with rage. This annoying, moralising busybody, Sir Thomas Overbury, was standing in the way of her grand plans. He had to go. Here's where things take a truly dark turn. Frances, with the help of some rather unsavoury characters, began to plot. Her main accomplice was a woman named Anne Turner, a notorious go-between and a dabbler in dark arts, known for her distinctive yellow-starched ruffs. which, by the way, promptly went out of fashion after she was hanged for her troubles. They consulted with astrologers and apothecaries, seeking out potions and charms to either win Carr's love or, more sinisterly, to ensure Overbury's silence. Now King James, keen to please his favourite, offered Overbury a diplomatic mission abroad, specifically to Russia. A cushy gig, you might think, a chance to get out of London and avoid the drama. But Overbury, perhaps sensing a trap or simply determined to stay by Carr's side and fight the good fight, flat out refused. Big mistake. Refusing the king's command was an insult, a direct challenge to royal authority. And King James, for all his foibles, did not take kindly to being defied. So on April 26, 1613, Sir Thomas Overbury found himself clapped in irons and thrown into the Tower of London on the flimsy pretext of insubordination. Many at court saw it as a temporary measure, a bit of a royal huff, designed to make him reconsider. They were wrong. This wasn't just James flexing his royal muscles. It was Frances Howard and her crew clearing the path. While in the Tower, Overbury was kept in unusually harsh conditions. No visitors, no letters. And then the gifts started arriving. Jellies, tarts, roasted partridges, wine, all sent by Frances Howard, ostensibly out of concern for his health. But these weren't exactly get-well-soon baskets. Oh no, these were laced with various poisons: mercury, arsenic, sulfuric acid. Overbury was being slowly, excruciatingly poisoned. By the way, get this. The attempts to poison Overbury were surprisingly ineffective. His constitution was apparently so robust that he lingered for months, despite being given doses of poison that, according to one of the co-conspirators, should have killed 20 men. The conspirators, growing increasingly frustrated by his resilience, eventually resorted to a poison-laced enema administered by an apothecary's assistant. Talk about a gruesome end. Overbury finally succumbed to his torment on September 15, 1613. His body deteriorated rapidly, emitting a foul smell, and he was buried quickly, almost suspiciously quickly. At the time, his death was put down to natural causes, a sudden illness. No one mourned him much, least of all Frances Howard, who, within 2 months, had her annulment granted, thanks to King James pulling some serious strings, and married Robert Carr in a lavish ceremony with the king himself in attendance. Carr, as a wedding present, was even created Earl of Somerset. They were the power couple of the moment, riding high on the waves of scandal and royal favour. Now, let's pull back and have a gander at this whole sordid affair through the lens of purpose and integrity, shall we? Frances Howard. Where was the moral clarity in her decisions? Non-existent, mate. Her purpose was singularly self-serving, to secure power and status through marriage to the king's favourite. Integrity? She wouldn't know it if it bit her on the arse. She was driven by sheer, unadulterated ambition and a ruthless disregard for human life. Her actions were a textbook case of the ends justify the means, even if those means involved slow, painful murder. The trade-off for her was simple: Overbury's life for her social ascension. Was it a stroke of genius or madness? A bit of both, perhaps, but ultimately it was a desperate, evil act born of a warped sense of entitlement. Robert Carr. Ah, poor old Carr. Was he a villain or just a pawn? Initially, his purpose seemed to be merely enjoying the king's favour and the lavish lifestyle that came with it. His moral clarity was clouded by infatuation and, frankly, a lack of intellectual depth. He was easily manipulated by Frances and her family. His integrity was compromised when he allowed his friend to be imprisoned, presumably knowing, or at least suspecting, Frances's dark intentions. He certainly profited from Overbury's demise. Was his decision to go along with it a stroke of genius or madness? Neither, really. It was a weakness, a spineless capitulation to a stronger will, and a devastating lack of loyalty to his closest friend. He prioritised his lust and continued favour with the king over basic human decency. King James I, the monarch, the supposed fount of justice. Where does he stand? His role is a bit murky, isn't it? He pushed for the annulment, sent Overbury to the Tower, and initially seemed keen to sweep the whole thing under the rug. Was he accessory to the crime? Unlikely, directly. But his blind spot for Carr, his desperate desire to keep his favourite happy, certainly created the environment for such a heinous crime to occur. His purpose was to maintain his personal relationships and perhaps his sense of royal prerogative. His integrity was seriously questionable when he pressured the court for the annulment and then showed a marked reluctance to investigate Overbury's death thoroughly. He traded potential justice for personal convenience and the protection of his image. The entire scandal laid bare the rot at the heart of James I's court. It exposed a system where personal favouritism trumped justice, where ambition ran unchecked, and where the powerful could operate with disturbing impunity. It showed that belief in one's own self-importance, when combined with power, can lead to monstrous actions. Imagine this scene, set a couple of years after Overbury's death. It's late 1615. King James is, as usual, doting on Carr, now Earl of Somerset. They're playing chess, perhaps, or out hunting. But there's a new young lad making eyes at the king, a rising star named George Villiers, a future favourite, who'll eventually push Carr right out of the picture. Suddenly, a messenger arrives, pale and agitated. He's from the Tower of London with a letter from the current lieutenant, Sir Gervase Helwys. Helwys, who himself had been implicated in Overbury's imprisonment, though he later claimed he was unaware of the poisoning attempts, is now having a crisis of conscience. He's heard whispers, seen things, and now an apothecary's assistant, one who had supposedly administered the fatal enema, has made a deathbed confession. The king reads the letter, his face slowly turning from amusement to disbelief, then to fury. The letter details how Overbury was not just ill, but poisoned. And the finger is pointing directly at Francis Howard, and by extension, Robert Carr. James slams the letter down. Poisoned? By God's teeth, poisoned. My favourite. A murderer? He turns to Carr, who's gone white. Robert! What is the meaning of this? Is this true? Is this your wife's doing? Carr stammers, denies, tries to bluff his way out. But the king's eyes, usually so loving, are now filled with suspicion and dawning horror. The jig is up. The facade has cracked. The dark secrets of the Howard family and Carr's complicity are about to spill out. The game of chess is over. A much deadlier one has begun. What if Sir Thomas Overbury had taken that diplomatic mission to Russia? Picture it. Overbury, perhaps reluctantly, packs his bags, grumbling about the cold and the barbaric Russians. He sets sail, disappears for a few years, living in relative safety, perhaps even writing some scathing satires about life in Muscovy. Meanwhile, back in England, Francis Howard still wants to marry Robert Carr. Without Overbury's obstinate resistance, perhaps the annulment process is smoother, less contentious. Carr, without his moral compass, might fall even deeper into the Howards' orbit, becoming a complete puppet of their political machinations. The king, still infatuated, might continue to bestow honours and power upon him, unchecked by Overbury's wise counsel. But here's the kicker. Without the scandal, without the shockwaves of Overbury's murder, the true depravity and corruption at the heart of James's court might never have been fully exposed. The public outcry, the trials, the confessions, they were a brutal wake-up call, a stark reminder that even the king's inner circle was not immune to the darkest human impulses. The Overbury scandal, for all its horror, inadvertently shone a spotlight on the dangers of unchecked power and favouritism, arguably laying some groundwork for the public disquiet that would eventually lead to greater challenges to royal authority in the decades to come. So, while Overbury would have lived, perhaps England's path would have been even more rotten, its eventual reckoning even more severe. Sometimes even tragedy can serve a purpose, however grim. So there you have it, folks. The Overbury scandal in all its dark, dramatic glory. A tale of love, lust, power, and a whole heap of poison. Francis Howard and Robert Carr, the golden couple, found guilty of murder. The commoners involved, like Anne Turner and the apothecaries, paid the ultimate price, hanged for their part in the conspiracy. Francis confessed. Carr maintained his innocence, but everyone knew better. And thanks to King James's lingering affection, they were spared execution, instead spending years in comfortable imprisonment in the Tower before being pardoned and fading into obscurity. Their grand love affair, incidentally, didn't last, ending in mutual loathing. Turns out murder isn't the best foundation for a happy marriage, eh? The Overbury scandal was a real eye-opener for Jacobean England. It damaged the monarchy, exposed the deep corruption and moral decay within the court of James I, and cemented the idea that power, left unchecked, can twist even the most basic human instincts into something truly monstrous. It taught us that even those closest to the throne are not immune to the temptations of greed and ambition, and that sometimes the truth, no matter how ugly, will eventually bubble to the surface. Stay curious, stay sharp, and stay just sober enough to remember it all. This was just a swig of history, and if it wasn't in your textbook, it bloody well should have been. And before you go, do a brother fav and like, share, and subscribe.